So my name is Shawn Morris. This is the Terrain Studio. It's my art studio here where I produce miniature wargaming models, do a lot of wargaming terrain, as well as just scale models and any techniques that go with modeling. Scale model is, if I can akin it to like railway modeling, people are familiar with that. So it's basically just assembling different objects into creative worlds. It can simulate real worlds or fantasy worlds. It's a combination of painting, modeling, sculpting, and just generally assembling something into a creation that you can either visualize or replicate a realistic scenario. I got started when I was pretty young. I started off with just scale model kits, cars, tanks, etc. I really like the aspect of being able to assemble something from a relatively, a bunch of parts, a Lego as a small kid that moved into modeling when I was older. And once I realized that you could assemble things from small bits, then I just realized the next evolution was making the small bits myself and sort of effectively building kits into larger scale situations. Landscapes specifically I'm interested in, and making things look real from, unreal objects. One of the first scenarios or scenes that I made was just a small little 1 foot by 1 foot crossroads, and I just wanted to see if I could replicate, an aerial image. I actually used Google Maps to just kind of pick a spot, simulating a World War II scenario. I really liked that sort of era. So I just made a little crossroads, pretty crude if I was comparing my skills from then till now, but it ended up looking pretty good. I used it for a university class, and from there I just started adding onto the pieces and kind of took off from there. So that was back in around 2001. I think my favorite part is taking something that usually I have a visual in my mind, and typically the best things come from inspiration from real things, but I create the map in my brain before I ever start creating something. And it's interesting bringing something that I can visualize to life kind of through the process. And sometimes they're a bit difficult to explain to people what they're going to look like, but I feel the most success when they come out looking on the back end as to what I kind of started with. And certainly there's an evolution to that. Not everything is perfect, and as I go, the creativity kind of kicks in, and original ideas become sort of morphed into different ideas along the way. But bringing something from a nothing process into a tangible piece that people can enjoy later is really the best part of the whole thing. I think what I really got into the scale modeling is I like to do things very minute. I was always a very small printer, a small writer. I like to draw small things. So I think the ability to bring large scale items into small scale with hyper detail is actually what drives this the most for me. I like to build small scale. The smaller the scale, the better. Oftentimes I have to be driving my projects off the scale that the world needs to be functional in. But if you look around the studio, even behind me, the drive for me was just using my passion for making small things be hyper real and making that come to life. Hobbying and model making, like any other hobby, can be expensive. But the interesting part about model making is that you can often take relatively cheap objects, turn them into really unique and creative pieces with simple manipulation. Part of that is just going through the process. So working with cheap materials, making mistakes, and experimenting is really a great part of the hobby, because you aren't wrecking really expensive things, and you don't have that same fear when the objects are cheap. So I do a lot of experimentation. I typically will build many mock-ups of the end product before I ever get there. I want to go through the motions of again, understanding the materials, marrying them together, manipulating the materials, and often bringing two objects that have no business being together in the same space as the same project is part of model making. So I oftentimes have to really understand the materials, and if I'm working with cheap materials, I can afford those mistakes, right? We have no mistakes, just happy accidents. If I can steal a great line from Bob Ross, that is true. Model making is no different than painting in that respect, that you're constantly improving, working, manipulating, and trying to bring things together to make unique and interesting objects. Tabletop and wargaming, pretty interchangeable terms for a lot of people. People are probably akin to some of the games like Risk and Axes and Allies. Basically, tabletop wargaming is kind of an evolution of board games. You're really trying to live out and interact and sort of enact the board game in a different level. So it's very much an interactive game that works with whatever associated gaming system or rule system that goes with that. Wargaming has been around for a long time. It's very interesting for people that are in it. It's like 3D chess and beyond. There's a lot of engagement factors with the pieces that you're working with. And the terrain is just one more element of that. It just adds to the immersion level, the experience. Playing on a board game that's flat with printed pictures is interesting. Interacting then with 3D pieces that you get to move and look around and move around and manipulate makes that experience just that much more. Anyone who's into wargaming can probably be akin to that experience and that feeling of that. So I really like that wargamers like to use the pieces to make their gaming experience better, and that's why I got into making wargames, wargame terrain, etc. Because I really like that immersion level as well. So my favorite medium to work in is foam. Foam from a structural standpoint, and then I like to reinforce everything with plastic. 3D printing is really big in the world of models and amateur hobbyists for sure, but I don't actually own any 3D printers. These are my 3D printers. I really like to make original pieces. It's not that I don't use some greebles and bits and 3D parts that I can purchase or get produced, but typically most of my stuff is hand built and scratch built, and the reason I exist is because I want to make original pieces, and that's why I'm able to kind of still exist in a world that is very heavily dominated by 3D printing, resin printing. So foam and plastics are my favorite, and when I say plastics, it's just plastic sheets or plastic rods that I cut and manipulate into other objects, and there's lots of examples around the studio. The wall behind me is actually entirely made out of insulation foam as well. So foam is a great medium because you can really sculpt and shape it, and the nice thing about it is no matter how small you make the foam, it can still remain quite rigid and give you some good sound structure. Relatively cheap in terms of you can purchase it in large bulk, and you can go a long way when you're building a miniature with a sheet of foam. So those are my two favorite mediums to work in. Obviously, those don't translate well to landscapes. They do help you to build a substructure, but when you're trying to build things like a landscape or rolling hills, etc., you got to work into some of your sands and ballasts. And the nice thing about a lot of the natural elements is that you can find them and get them in nature. There's a cheap route to go where you can go and dig stuff up. I typically go a little bit more of the commercial route, and so I'll use things like sands that you can purchase that are already sifted, make sure all the organic materials are removed from them. But amateur hobbyists that's looking to do some of this stuff, you have so many objects that exist around you in the real world that you can usually use and translate into cool models. And I certainly started there. Just now that I'm doing production stuff, I have to be a little bit more careful with what I'm shipping across the border, etc. So there's obviously reasons that I've moved away from those. But substrates are one of the challenges and also one of the fun bits. It's a creative exercise for your mind to find the best thing to use to make something else, and that's part of the process. I have a hard time walking around anywhere in any store and not trying to visualize what I can use something for. It typically slows me down in some places, but it's also, again, that creative exercise where everything around you can be inspiration. I'm filing it away in my index of the brain to access later. Manipulating things with your hands is a pretty therapeutic process, and I'm, again, one of the parts I look most forward to when I finish, and I can realize that that's something that went from literally a found object into something pretty creative. So the Terrain Studio is what I call my studio space. So the Terrain Studio is me. It's the work that I do here in studio. It's my creative outlet. And I got into it because people were really asking me to do work for them. When you have skill or an interest, a talent, not unlike anybody who has any ability to do anything that somebody else can't, people ask and start to wonder if you can do stuff for them. So I had that interest in people asking me, and then it had an evolution into to companies wanting to have some of the work coming out of here. So I decided that I would take the leap and make a small production company, sort of a one-man show. And I've been fortunate to be able to lean on my fellow wargamers in terms of helping me out with painting. It's really helped to make a little community. And my studio is a kind of a community space. I share a lot of the work that I do out of here. So truthfully, the Terrain Studio is a creative outlet for me. It's my passion. And it's just something that I've been able to marry into a revenue stream of some respect. But ultimately, this is still a passion project for me and something I've been doing for a long time. So the Terrain Studio ultimately does make products for individuals, whatever that request, whether it be corporate or private. And really, I'm about making projects that people are, to their desire. And so not everything needs to be big. Sometimes you have to have the space to accommodate stuff. And so I really work with customers to make sure that I'm making something that they're going to enjoy in the end. Process of, for me, is always enjoyable. Seldom work on anything that I don't have an interest in, and I'm very upfront about that. I want to have an intrinsic interest in the build because that makes the best product at the end for me. The additional part of this is the teaching element. So I am an educator by trade, and so there's a natural, correlation between wanting to teach other people the things that I'm doing and just what I do in my everyday world. Teaching other people the skills that they don't have is a really interesting element for here. And one might think that why would you want to show other people how to do things that you're already doing? But it's a twofold piece. Teaching people how to do something doesn't mean necessarily they're going to go out and do it, or they're going to replace the work that I'm doing. But sharing the work that I'm doing and sharing the process is part of building the hobby and building the interest in model making. I feel like I have a little bit of a part to play in perpetuating this element of hobbying. Some people like to paint, some people like to game, some people like to build. And I like to do all of those things, but I'm best at building. And so my contribution to the community has to be sharing the things that I'm doing. I've met and interacted with so many great companies and people because of the sharing that I do. And so I don't want to be an isolated guy in a basement building things that go out and nobody ever really knows. I want to have that connect with people. And whether they're a customer or just trying to learn something from me, all of that, perpetuates this hobby, and that's one of the best parts of the whole thing, and that is what the Terrain Studio encapsulates. So talking about projects, I've done a lot in the years, both small and large, and I have a couple that I would highlight for various reasons, more like milestones, I think, projects for me. There was a project I did probably it would be going on maybe like 12 years ago now, so kind of going back in the archive, and it was a project that I built for the purposes of making a contribution to the community. So it was a project that was inspired from World War II Holland landscape, and I actually had gone to Holland, the Netherlands rather, just a year prior. And so me being in the countryside, seeing the raised roads, the flooded fields, etc., really got me inspired. And so when I came back to Canada, I replicated that and I built a table. And I built a table that wasn't for a client, it was in fact for a community. And the following year I went back to what's referred to as the European Team Championships, and I brought that. That was my carry-on luggage at that time. And a few people had to take it as carry-on because it was big. And we contributed that. I contributed that table to that tournament series. And this table has now traveled to upwards of 7 countries and been a part of the tournament, and it has lived in various homes and gaming communities and been used. And that's a really cool project. So it was a piece of my work that got to travel around the world, play on by multiple people from around the world. I've seen photos emerge years later, and that was a really cool project for me. Another one that I really enjoy was the first piece of terrain that I did for a production piece, and it was for Fantasy Flight Games. And it wasn't a large piece, it was a 2x2 piece, an entirely scratch-built piece. It was inspired by the movie Rogue One, and so from the planet Scarif, and got to make my first large-scale model entirely from scratch. There was no 3D printed pieces, it was handcrafted. In fact, it was 280 handcrafted pieces to make one building. It ended up being a really cool piece, and it has been now photographed and used in production for products for the last 6 years. It was built back in 2018. So 6 years going on now. And that was a really cool piece because it was the first time I had a piece that was used by a company and used to showcase the products that they had. So it was the first time I've really married up my model making with wargaming and getting other people to be inspired to buy the products that were photographed on the terrain that I made. So that was kind of feather in the cap, if you will. So one of my other favorites was the one I actually just finished, and that was a Lord of the Rings themed project. The reason I like that one is because I feel like it was the first time in a bit that I really challenged my skill set to a level that I was, not comfortable with, because I was making a really topographical build out of foam. And I used a lot of new techniques, and like I said, that was one of the projects where I invested a lot of time in the substructure, the mobility, the functionality of being able to tear down something. It was the first time where I moved away from the comfort of wood as a base, and I moved away from the comfort of production pieces, and I went everything scratch built. Everything, it was, you know, one off from the studio, and the end product was great. It took a long time to make it, but the reaction by the customer was tremendous. And this was the first time where I got a reaction beyond just the customer. It was a full reveal with his family, and the whole family took it in, and people who are not tied into wargaming were giving reactions, and I got genuine reactions from people who I had no previous interaction with. So they had no expectation of what it was to look like, and so kind of seeing that reaction, because I don't often get those, was pretty inspirational for me too. Like I build things to get the reactions. Part of the, you know, it's one of the non-monetary gains from doing the work. To see a reaction by people who I didn't know and didn't have an interaction with was pretty genuine, because I felt like that made me feel like the piece had that wow factor I was looking for, and not just for the customer that it was intended for. So yeah, so 3 kind of really fun pieces. All of them are awesome, and I'll be really candid. Most times when I finish a project, I'm really happy to see it leave. Looking at something for 200, 300, 400 hours, especially when I remember those frustrating parts, sometimes it's okay to send it off. And I have no problem sending pieces out that I've worked a long time on, because I know that's the intent of those projects. Okay guys, well, welcome to the Terrain Studio. I'm going to be your host, Shawn Morris. And so in the Terrain Studio over here, this section is the filming section. So we do both the live stream as well as recording of tutorials over here. But not to be overlooked, it actually has some terrain as well. So this is 1:1 scale terrain here in the studio. I wanted to have kind of a nice atmospheric background here in studio. So I ended up building myself an entire set just out of foam. This is all foam pieces here, just as mentioned, my favorite medium. So I managed to simulate the scene from The Mandalorian, the cantina scene. I really enjoyed that scene. And so what I did is I just built some panels, put them on here. I did a tutorial on this, just some bullet holes, some damage, etc. We have a nice Friday Night Fights logo done up here. And then it's just got some cool sort of like aesthetics along the way. I've incorporated some of the actual house elements directly into that. Just a couple racks over here, and again, just more of the wall. This is a simulated door frame. Again, just to kind of add a little bit to the ambiance. I got a really great story about this. My small child is very much afraid of whatever possibly could live behind that door. So just a little fun thing, as she's got older, she has got a little bit more brave, and now she's willing to knock on that door. The table that you kind of see here in the foreground, this is actually where we do most of the live stream gaming for the wargaming. This is another chance for me to show off the terrain that's either printed and that I'm working on, and or handcrafted. So as mentioned, 3D printing is taking over the scene, and so I get a chance to work with a lot of companies to show off their products, and then show consumers, future hobbyists, how to take this terrain to the next level. So putting some paint on it. So here you see some bare bones terrain, and this would be a nice starting point for me in the tutorials to let people build it up from this. This is the stuff that you can print in your own home, and then my tutorials just show you how to bring it to that next level, so you can have that cool gaming setup. Over here we have another section. This is obviously where I do a lot of the production, both of the live stream and the tutorial editing as well. Here's another backdrop. This was one of the projects I did previously. So I'm a big Star Wars enthusiast, and so I thought I would build myself my own Death Star. So it's a really neat backdrop, great for meetings as well. It's just a more interesting background, and one I don't have to digitally produce. So if you come around here, this is my desk area where I work. So this is where I again do my production, both the editing for the videos as well as the live stream that we have here. So this is just kind of the command desk, if you will, sitting here enjoying the Friday Night Fight. So we do a fight generally twice a month. It is on the Terrain Studio YouTube channel, and it's called Friday Night Fights. It's really great. Again, another way to build and harbor the community here in the studio and get a chance to meet and interact with new folks. So we've definitely had some strangers, but many of our strangers have become friends here through the work that we do. So we'll come over here. This is what I refer to as the racks. This is effectively both a collection and the products that I work with. So I have various things in build form, as well as some raw materials. So over here, this is the plethora of flockings and ballast that I use. Ballast is common term sand, and then flocking common term would just be the grass or turfs that I use. So, you know, a nice palette of options for me. I typically will run mix. I'll use a lot of customization in the work that I do. That way it doesn't just look like coming out of the package. Here's all the auxiliary products that I have. So a lot of paints right here. This is kind of the base coats of paints. And then up here, a large selection of adhesives, as well as acrylic products that I'll use for various things, muds and snows, etc. Don't really throw a lot out in the studio just because I can generally repurpose a lot of things. And maybe they're 5 years down the road. I've just recently done a project and I used something that I've been carrying around for 14 years. Finally found a use for it. I knew that was coming. Just took a while to get there. We move over here. I'm actually in the mid-assembly of some models, so I will typically work here, grab an iPad, you know, put on an audiobook or a movie. It's a great way to kind of immerse, you know, two things at once. You don't often get to do that, but I really enjoy, you know, whether it's listening to other wargaming channels or watching a movie for inspiration. It's often how I pass the time down here. Over here I have some paint racks. They're broke down into 3 areas. This is all weathering effects. Here is paint for my airbrush, and then over here I have a lot of pigments and washes, and so all of those in combination really help to add the weathering effects to the work. I think there's some model shots you can have a look at, and those are really what brings it all together. It's very seldom you're going to take something out of a bottle and make it look perfect, but a combination of a few things will really help you get the desired look. Over here I have my airbrush booth that's vented to the outside. This is where I do my airbrushing. I do a lot of airbrushing, much more than paint. The airbrush really is, it's a task all in and of itself. It's almost a hobby in a hobby, and people often ask me, how do you get good at airbrushing? And the answer is really simple: you airbrush. I was terrible when I started, and I spent a lot of time. In fact, it was a little daunting and I was a little afraid to get into that world. But now that I got there and I got some experience with it, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's my go-to method, and it really speeds up a lot of the work that I do, and also accentuates and makes it look a lot better, in my opinion. Over here is another workstation, and you asking why so many workstations. I'm only one guy, but I have to be everywhere at all times, and there's a lot of downtime with hobby work, and so sometimes you bounce around so that you're efficient in the process. A lot of dry and wait times, and so having multiple stations for me just makes the work a lot more conducive. I don't have to clean up and move things continuously. Another collection of paints over here. So this is much more the bottle / brush paint. There is some airbrush paint as well, and just a little bit of a piece that I'm working on right now. And you'll see throughout the studio I have various pieces in works in progress stages, and that's exactly how I can stay pretty efficient by working on multiple things. I try not to expand out of one project, but sometimes a project has multiple pieces, and that's best to keep me busy. Just moving over here to my last workstation. I just have a couple pieces laid out here, but this is where I have some organizational drawers, etc. Again, just storing away bits and bobs just to keep them out dust free, and then working on some additional pieces. So if I grab this piece right here, you can see that this piece is very much a companion piece to this one, and in fact these two pieces actually go together to form one large piece. So this may be an example where I am working on the same project, but I am able to work on 2 pieces simultaneously as they do get married together. They also have a third companion piece. It's in the same line, but it is already finished, and so you can see that sort of like motif that I'm going for with these pieces. And then just finishing up here, I have some projects on the table, although this is typically where the main work will happen. So whatever large project I'm working on, this is the space to have it. But here I have a couple finished products that I can kind of walk through. So this one is referred to as the Cochin Industries. This was done for a Kickstarter. A really cool table. It's very industrial, multi-level, and all of these builds, and typically all of my builds, are designed to be viewed from every perspective. It's a 3D piece of art that's designed to be viewed at a 360 angle. So every angle, every change of level that you have, there's interesting stuff on here. I like to sync a lot of like little small features that unless you know or you're looking, you'll never see it. On this one particularly, I think we have 17 little rats hidden in here. It is fully LED lit as well. Got a panel over here that you wouldn't know unless I showed you. But there it is. So the table is fully LED lit as well. And LEDs are something that I introduce into some projects. Like I said, it has to come down to the functionality piece of that. So this one was done for a Kickstarter and just used to accentuate some really fantastic 3D designs done by a company. But of course, all of the paintwork, all of the weathering, all of the bringing it together in this configuration, that's kind of that step past from the printer bed to the tabletop. And we've had a lot of enjoyment on gaming with this in the studio. This next one over here is an entirely different build. This one is again an original creation, as they all are, but this one doesn't have 3D prints on it. In fact, this one was done to emulate the world of Kashyyyk via the Star Wars universe, the homeworld of the Wookiees. And this one is entirely made out of found and or handcrafted objects. So this tree is built out of foam. Entirely, it's then coated with a material called Sculptamold to make it nice and hard. But the tree itself was one big block of foam that was then carved into this tree structure. All of the platforms and pieces that are on here, there's various ones, but I'm gonna give you a few tips. This one is a dinner plate with a funnel attached. These two are stove covers that you would find on an element stove. The entirety of these ramps and buildings down here are bowls, coffee stir sticks, and a child's loud bullhorn. So that makes the building there. The groundwork is done with the flockings and materials that you saw on the shelf. These pieces over here are more funnels, and perhaps the best one of all is this building that is removable from the top. In the real world, it doubles as a dog food dish, and so don't worry, my dog is not starving. I had an extra dog food dish, turned that into a building. So sometimes you can do some really cool things with found objects if you repurpose, kind of think creatively past their initial function and turn them into the thing that you wanted. And in this case, I really looked at the shape, the design of the world, obviously inspired from Star Wars, and then converted it into the platforms that you see here simply by working with the shape. So sometimes the inspiration comes in strange places, and really the immersive world that you create in these pieces makes those war games that much better. This could be a collector piece. You could put, my child likes to use small purple plastic penguins and it interacts with this piece of terrain all the time. And again, it doesn't matter as long as you get the enjoyment out of it. That's what they're made for. So there you guys have it. It's the Terrain Studio. I hope this video is inspirational to people who are thinking about modeling. I got started very, very early, and the entry level into modeling can be simply from snap kits to assembling very advanced kits or making them all yourselves. I think that crafting and modeling are really interesting things that children or adults can get introduced to at any point in time. The tactility working with your hands is a fantastic exercise. I think that people should explore that more. Have a real set forget sort of mentality a lot of times when it comes to our hobby worlds. But I think that part of the work that I'm trying to do is tell people that there's a lot that can be made with a mindset and a creative approach, and I think that would be a message, if you will, in my closing thoughts. People can find me many places, but primarily you can go through the Terrain Studio Patreon. It's just patreon.com/the Terrain Studio. You can also just search the Terrain Studio or Shawn Morris really on Google if you want to find a lot of my stuff. My images and products are I should say projects are out there. I don't sell anything except for one-offs. And so my sort of niche in the world is making unique designs for people to be really happy with, and years to come, you'll never see another one of those. So I don't replicate, I do that intentionally. I won't duplicate projects as well, because I really want my customers to have the experience that they got something really special, because truthfully, that engagement with them and that interaction and that end project should be special, should be something that they're proud of from years to come and have that they can engage with however they so choose. And that's, like, again, that's the best part of the work that I do.